Have you ever heard of the musical known as The Puppet Master's Regime? Most likely you haven't. In fact, most die-hard theater lovers are often unfamiliar with this little production. It was a 1934 stage play, and the music, lyrics, and book were written anonymously. It starred upcoming performers such as Timmy Cutie Pie Wright, Sally Wilkers, Henry Gregory, and many others. At the time, it was the most expensive production to date. It was said to be the biggest, most spectacular stage show all the way to San Francisco and back. Testimonies. Tyler Warwick, 1901 to 1983. I went to see the show about a week after I turned 33. The ticket was a gift from my sister, who knew how much I loved the theater. I remember the signs for it were huge and rather gaudy. Oh, and the playbill. It was just a single red dot with a doll-like face on it. It seemed a bit melancholy for what I assumed was to be a musical comedy, but I didn't pay much attention. I was going to see a Broadway show after all. Georgina Long, 1911 to 1984. I had come to New York with my parents on an impromptu vacation after my grandmother had died. A Broadway musical seemed just like what we needed. Anyway, the cast was made completely of so-called new people, young children and adults alike who were long to getting back on stage after vaudeville became old news. It was quite charming, really, but I didn't take notice of that odd little playbill. All the playwrights and lyricists and everyone else were all unnamed, and that design, just a little red dot with a particular little face in it, not even a title. Carl Hannigan, 1920, 1993. I do recall most of the first act. Then again, who could forget? The story was slightly hard to follow at first. There was a little boy who lived in a puppet shop. Or maybe he had lived down the street. No, he worked. He worked in the puppet shop. But he was homeless, so they provided him with housing. The kid's name was Mortium, something weird. Oh yes, it was Mortium? No, wait, it was Moriator. Moriator's employer was this old man named Mr. Obisker. I remember his name because his character was unimaginably unsettling, bouncing all around and getting angry at the little boy, all while keeping his nasal, giggly voice. Anyhow, the production opened to Moriator and an odd fellow getting into an argument over the boy not doing his work. Then the two of them sang this peculiar number about puppets. It was not a normal song, or at least the musicality wasn't normal. The lyrics were very enchanting and the music did this odd flowing thing about the room. Instruments would get very quiet without losing any power. Maybe it was just the acoustics. I'm most likely explaining it wrong anyway. Oh well, but in time, we got used to it. And then the show progressed. Gabriel Johnston, 1919 to 1976. This youngster, Moriator, something like that, was quite insecure about his stay in the puppet shop, and paranoid that his boss would throw him out. I was an aspiring lyricist at the time, and I'd done the lyrics for a few original community theater projects, so I was fascinated with the wording in these songs. I scribbled down a few lines after I went home. Unless I'm remembering wrong, the little puppet shop boy and Mr. Abi something had an introductory duet, and then Moriator went off for a short lament. That was a different, much more somber tune. If I stay and do everything right, I can live in the day and stay clear of the night. Out there's the dark, there's a world of lies. I can hear them whisper, and sometimes I could see their eyes. The eyes comment confused me for a moment, but I assumed that he was talking about the stars. It seemed as though the number was unnecessarily tragic and poorly situated within the show, but that was a minor quibble. Now, Moriator had a girlfriend named Trawhunt and a boyfriend named Abelot. After interrupting the final note in his lament, they all gushed about how much they loved puppets, but they couldn't afford one from Moriator's guardian shop. So they transitioned into a vibrant little number about joining forces to raise money so that they could build their own puppet. After this, the three all headed for school, and the story took a sharp turn into a different direction. After several attempts to begin again, now they had this really nasty teacher or headmistress named Madame Repario, or something like that. There was a reprise of the song from before, and she overheard them. At first, her remarks about the children's fantasies were somewhat comical, but then the light fixed on her, and she sang this heartbreaking song, the meaning of which was up for interpretation. It felt like it was about love, but there were all these strange puppet metaphors. The only lyric that stayed with me is, "Stroll through the wood cracks, show them your pains, the hole in your throat, and the strings in your veins." Then she went on this little breakdown. I assumed it was poorly conceived character trait. She began singing off key and went to beat one of the kids. The curtain fell, and there was a scuffle heard on stage. People whispered to each other, but a rising new orchestra piece silenced us. The curtain rose again, and we were outside the puppet shop. Louis Roberts, 1905 to 1967. Moriator and his friends went into the town and sang a song about selling dolls, I think it was, because the little girl made dolls in her spare time and she had to sell them. I remember those strange background characters. The company was so absolutely monotonous. They all wore some form of dark clothing, and each of them was very, very tall. I can remember how they all had their faces covered up by hair or hats or veils. None of them spoke. None of them even sang during the course of the show. They just walked in perfectly straight lines, as if they weren't even part of the production. Anyways, this strange song about buying dolls, it had absolutely no life. But for some reason, these children were putting their all into it. I could see the pain in their faces as they hit those high notes. And something else. As the lyrics went on, they seemed to get a little... It's hard to explain. They all looked like they were hurting. They were so pale and nervous all of a sudden. Coming from a Broadway family, I convinced myself it was only a stage fright, but it still made me just that bit anxious. Carrie Laurie, 1921 to 1995. The kids all got their money from this strange man in a cloak who sang a simple little tune. I still remember the lyrics. Despite the fall of rain, little kitties, everyone needs a little song. Wooden dolls give you pain, little kitties. Go on, little kitties, run along. His character was really unnerving, but I remember how truly gripping the melody was, so haunting. It got you right there in the gut. Even the little kid actors seemed unsettled by the new turn of the show. They all kept stuttering over their lines as they spoke and sang. And then a little bulb over the stage went out. Everyone gasped. And one man, I think, even laughed. The noise it made really spooked the little girl, little Miss what's-her-name. All the names were so very strange as well. All I know is that a light bulb had gone out and the actors were stumbling across the stage. The whole thing looked like a terrible flop. When the children re-entered the puppet shop, they presented Mr. Obiskur with the puppet pieces they'd acquired while the audience wasn't looking, singing a braggedy sort of chant, we done it, diddy diddy done did it. It was obnoxious, but thankfully brief. After that light fixed on Moriator, he began another tune. The song was a dud, and all I remember was that he flubbed the last line. The lyric had something to do with the final stroke of light or something sort of a moon-based metaphor. All I know is that he forgot the words, and all that could be heard in the theater was the sounds of a car horn outside the building. The boy, he didn't seem shocked or embarrassed or nothing, but his posture improved out of the blue, and the orchestra stopped. He projected half of the word, sorry, then suddenly burst forth into a wordless vocalization. The music resumed, and the other characters began to join him. Marcus Edgar, 1918 to 1968. So after that bulb went out, the whole set started falling apart. We, the audience, tried our best to ignore it, but it was near impossible. I saw 2 sets of very angry attendees get up and leave. The set piece for the puppet shop screeched in its way on the stage, and we could see the paper sky background falling down in the far back. The lights almost dimmed in what we assumed was an attempt to hide the malfunctioning set pieces. The kids, with the help of the oddly mononymous Mr. Obiskur, constructed the puppet, and this strange song played. To this day, I don't know what they were saying. At the time, it sounded vaguely like Latin, but I went on to study Latin in college the next year, and it certainly wasn't like anything I had learned. I remember how it enchanted me, though it enchanted all of us. We all began to feel this thing course through us. I remember a few people humming in an attempt to rid themselves of the sound, and those in the front rows seemed to be crying out in what sounded like pain. The actors themselves looked as though they were about to pass out at any moment. They were doing this odd sort of ballet, tripping all over themselves, and a few more lights started flashing and breaking. We all sat and waited for the song to end when I'm sorry, I can't continue. George Frank, 1899 to 1999. The lights were all going on and off at random, and we were all praying the damn song would end soon. It had this force going with it. It was sucking us in. We could feel it. The little kids and the puppet man were dancing all around when, well, you see, I really thought I could do it. I thought I could do it. I was right there in the 5th row, so I saw, but I can't. Caroline Mark, 1901 to 1949. The lighting was completely out of control. It was a mess, and that song, it was awful. But something about it, it was powerful. It had a force. I watched intently as the dancers began to skip around, and when we thought they were the lights. Final testimony. The actual events of the final scene of Act 1 of the Puppet Master's regime have been up for debate for many years. Few people are willing to speak about what happened on stage during those final moments. Many believe that there is no actual recording of an interview with somebody who is willing to tell the story. That is not true. One testament survives from a Billy Prescott who was only 6 at the time of the show. At such a young age, one might assume that he was less affected by what he recalls happening. I was just a kid, so I don't remember much. All I can vaguely recall is that song. It was giving me a headache. I turned to my father and asked him if I could leave, if we could leave, when suddenly I saw the stage illuminate in this bright red light. The music stopped as one instrument after another died out, and I swear I heard pounding underneath the floor. Everyone was questioning what was happening, even the actors. I remember that teacher lady being pushed through the door of the shop, and then everyone else came flying in from off stage, toppling on top of each other like rag dolls. There were people there who didn't fit the design scheme of the production. Stagehands and technical workers, I assume now. I remember the little girl screamed at the audience, then ran behind the shopkeeper while other actors continued singing. A few people started crying right there on the stage when, without warning, this curtain came forward. It's hard to describe what it looked like. It was a clear plastic wall that came down from above. Several years later, I saw Carrie the musical on Broadway during one of its few runs. The thing that came down on the prom goers when Carrie was using laser lights to kill everybody, it was just like that. A bunch of set pieces from earlier scenes came down onto the sides of the stage, trapping all the actors in the center. Chaos erupted. The actors stopped singing and began pounding on the plastic wall. Then, for some reason, they began to back away as if some unseen assailants were approaching them. They fled to the back of the stage, all except the little boy. He was the only one who hadn't stopped singing. Amid all that screaming and crying, the curtain flew out, and everything was in silence. Due to the odd abruptness, the audience thought it was just a horrible ending to a terrible musical. We were about to get up when the curtain opened again, revealing the stationary plastic wall, upon which was a single light fixed upon the little boy, Moriator. He had crawled his way through. We could see the blood on his hands, but the way he looked was there were strings attached to every part of his body. We could all see his stomach, or lack of one. Anyway, it was like somebody had put a huge ice cream scooper through his belly. He was sobbing all over the stage, twitching and swinging around. It was a sight so unnatural, looking so painful and twisted and wrong. Even now, I can't seem to wrap my head about how, but... And so everyone looked at him, not knowing what to do. And then he spoke.
Help me. Please. Help me.
Was all he could make out. And then he vomited and suddenly collapsed. The plastic wall lifted and the lights all came on. We saw the rest of them. They were all dead. Every one of them looked exactly like the little boy. Everyone had those strings attached, and we watched as all of them, even the little boy, as their strings were pulled on, their lifeless bodies rose on cue, and they bowed. Conclusion. We cannot be for certain that the above statements make up a credible account, but unfortunately it is all we have to work with. The Puppet Master's regime sparked much debate among the theater companies. Several audience members had to go to therapy for years to come, and the show itself has been covered up by the police. The theater company, as well as the police department, who had never managed to solve the gruesome murders of the cast and crew of the show, denied that the play ever existed. However, In recent years, the story has resurfaced, sparking a lot of new conversations on the subject. The theater that housed the musical still refuses to acknowledge the show's existence, and most theater historians know nothing about the show in general. To this day, the identities of the anonymous lyric and music writers are unknown, and to our knowledge, all recordings and police reports have been destroyed. Despite this, though, certain pieces of historical documentation, some info on the production has been unearthed. The show itself had its first workshop in London in 1928. One of the songs, Get a Puppet, was recorded with vocals by 12-year-old Gareth Creeley. This recording is presumed to have been lost, though some say it's available on the black market of the internet. Other than that, no official record were ever made. Some ancient accounts say that an illegal tapping of the final scene of Act 1 was filmed from backstage, but we cannot be certain if this is anything more than a rumor. As for an official memorabilia, very little of anything has survived. Until her death in 1994, theatrical historian Gladys Masters kept 2 large-scale promotional posters that she displayed at charity events, but these have since disappeared. Early costumes by Alice Levy, the costume designer on the play until she quit following payment disputes, are also now on display at the Piccadilly Theatrical Museum in Dover, England. Other than that, the previously mentioned playbills from the production's premiere night were given out, but most audience members destroyed their copies after seeing the show. Legend has it, around 10 to 20 survive. The show has gone on a small cult fan base over the years. Here, recently, an off-Broadway revival has been scheduled to premiere soon. When I was last broached the topic of the 1934 musical The Puppet Master's Regime, my knowledge was apparently very limited. I had originally believed that all of the guests who entered the theater on that fateful night were deceased. But I was incorrect. One lone audience member, an Alice Corley James, who was 9 years old when her grandparents took her to see the show, now lives in Connecticut with her grandchildren. I gathered this information after my long investigation into the theater which housed the play's debut. I found myself on a wild goose chase, a long line of theater owners shoving me in different directions via emails or the rare private meeting. I was eventually given the home address of a little old man who shall go unnamed. This man had worked in several theaters over the past 50 or so years and had collected many borrowed theater items. One of these items was a box labeled 34 Creeley Wright. The gentleman claimed that he found it in the vaults of the August Wilson Theater, but I'm not sure if he can be trusted, as his eggs seem to have been in quite a few baskets, if you understand me. The oddly numbered box contained several sloppily organized papers, all of which detailed the long-awaited production of the Puppet Master's Regime. The most interesting of these files was a bulky folder that covered the 1928 workshop in London, where the title of the show was originally Moriator's Friends, later changed to Moriator's Puppet, and as the music was refined, however, the title became The Puppet Dressed in Black, and then Puppet Master, which was the title they used during the actual stage readings. The folder also contained a partial script for the show, although many pages appeared to have been missing. None of the song lyrics were shown in the script, though the song titles were printed in their place, along with notes for the young actor playing the part of Moriator. Most of the notes are from the director, a man named Richard Weber, but one particular note seems a bit ominous. A little less vibrato on this one, Garrus. Make me proud. Make us both proud. From Mr. Sheridan. This Mr. Sheridan never showed up in any of the other files. He may have been an unaccredited assistant director, but something about his handwriting didn't sit right with me. Anyhow, some of the song titles are rather fascinating. Tunes with such names as Never Mind Me, Mister, Moriator Was an Orphan, and Get a Puppet make the production seem like any other. The characters aren't written in a strange way. Much to my disappointment, it comes across just like a harmless little kiddie show, cutesy and upbeat. However, as the script progresses, the notes from Mr. Sheridan become more evident, and his messages become increasingly disturbing. We love it. We love it the way you used to do it. Stop doing what we never told you to try. Your cheeks puff at the end of his number. Garrus, I love it. He loves it. We both love it. They love it. Meet me backstage after the reading, Garrus. He has a gift for you. Meet us backstage again, Garrus. They love to look at you. Never leave us, Garrus. You're too important to the Puppet Master. After reading up to the scene where Moriator and his friends try to sell dolls, creatively titled the Doll Selling Song, I decided to stop and research this Garrus Creeley. I was not prepared for the sickening results. Garrus Creeley was born on November 3rd, 1916. His mother had been a vaudeville stripteaser who lacked the funds necessary to support a child. As a result, he was taken in as a 3-year-old by a man whose last name was Sheridan. His first name is recorded differently in many documents. Most people believe it to be either Carmichael or Charles. Sheridan was apparently a Coney Island architect who designed elaborate funhouses and carnival freak shows. He was also a private composer, having written many vaudeville numbers and themes. Garrus Creeley Sheridan became a semi-popular vaudeville performer from 1921 to 1923. Upon which he was removed from the Sheridan home after claiming to have been sexually abused by his adoptive father. He was taken to live with Annabelle and Henry McGregor, a middle-class family in Upper Manhattan. Annabelle and Henry, in an attempt to rid him of his childhood trauma, relocated to Worcester, England, with McGregor's relatives. Coincidentally, Puppet Master began rehearsals for the workshop a year after Garrus Creeley moved to England. The music and lyrics were still accredited anonymously. Now, one might assume that this is just another depressing backstory to a child performer from the early 1900s. But it gets worse. Sheridan, along with being an architect and composer, was also a great patron of child pornography. He was the lead of a small group of individuals who specialized in the production of such articles. What makes this more revolting is that from 1921 to 1923, the years that Creeley was his legal son, Sheridan housed a child-centered burlesque theater/brothel underneath his estate. In 1924, he was placed in the Danvers State Lunatic Asylum in Massachusetts. He escaped in 1926, a year before rehearsals began for Puppet Master. Now, returning to the script for Puppet Master, we actually have a tangible record for both the end of Act 1 and as well as most of Act 2. the actual ending. The actual ending for Act 1, as it was written, is such. Moriator and his friends design a puppet exactly like the one that Moriator has seen in his dreams. This was explained in a song titled "The Puppet Dressed in Black," which I assume was cut in the Broadway production. This puppet then comes to life and calls upon his magical powers to send Moriator and his friends into a parallel universe. Act 2 begins with Moriator finding his friends, as well as Mr. Obiskur, to be asleep and dangling from puppet strings. The musical takes a more operatic theme, as we have 6 songs that are played one after another without a single interval of speech. The songs titled in order are "Never Mind Me, Mr. Reprise." I can hear them sing. "What is this place?" Moriator's soliloquy. "Wooden Dolls," and "The Wind and the Whisperings." After this, Moriator is confronted by the odd man dressed in black from the first act, who, in a long monologue, explains Moriator's deep, passionate sexual longings. Moriator realizes his clandestine emotions in a song entitled "Beautiful Music," in which the man and Moriator apparently fall spontaneously in love. Right before they allude to the thought of intercourse, the puppet dressed in black appears, jealous of Moriator's affections. Moriator strips naked in front of the puppet, allowing the wooden demon to seduce him. He offers his soul in return for release of the others close to him. When the children and Mr. Obiskur are returned, the puppet dressed in black and the old man reveal their sole motivations to punish little children who repress the nature of their sexual responsibilities. They explain this in what would eventually become the show title song, "The Puppet Master's Regime." Then, in a spout of randomness, the puppet's face turns bright red, and he shoves Moriator onto a bed shaped like a hand, apparently raping him. In the epilogue, we see that Moriator's friends have been returned to the puppet shop, but none of them remember anything about him. As you would assume, the workshop didn't do well at all. Anybody with half a brain could understand why a musical about children being obligated to have sex with adults and puppets wouldn't work now, let alone in 1928. It was met with such a terrible response that the authorities forced the workshop to shut down, classifying it as child sex tourism. Garris Creeley was temporarily removed from the McGregor household for their approval and allowing him to participate in the production, when in reality, the cast members were contractually obligated to never speak about the show to anyone outside the production. A week after Garris returned to the McGregors, he was kidnapped from his bedroom. This happened the day before his birthday. After 2 days, the authorities found Garris at the theater that had been holding the workshops. When he was discovered in the basement, tied to a bed, being violently raped by Sheridan. Sheridan, of course, was taken into police custody, where he died 2 days later of a lung infection. However, the most disturbing part of the crime scene was described by Officer James Cartwright, who broke in through the door and started fumbling down the stairs. We could hear him clearly screaming. We charged into the basement and saw puppets everywhere, all of them made to look exactly like the little Creeley fella. There had to be dozens of them all over the room. Some of them were neatly dressed like little dolls. Others didn't even have any clothing on at all. It was so disgusting. I feel sick just thinking about it. Along with the recorded 76 Garris Creeley esque puppets that were found underneath the theater. Authorities also discovered several articles of the occult in Sheridan's makeshift apartment. He had apparently begun to workshop an ancient god he called Pondamus, a dark spirit who controlled all of life with visible puppet strings. Most of the investigators believed that Sheridan had created this god himself using the surplus of insanity he had retained by the time of his death. They also found a 5,023-page novel that Sheridan had written over the course of the past 9 years entitled Puppets. It was an extended manuscript version of Puppet Master that was centered around the character of Moriator Abances, who was obviously based on Garrus Creeley. Following the events of Puppet Master, the McGregors admitted Garrus Creeley to the West Riding Mental Hospital, now known as the High Roads Hospital, in order to repair and accommodate his obvious mental damages. He was supervised by his adoptive uncle, Dr. Gregory McGregor, who personally documented his progression from 1928 to 1932, when he was released. Other than the folder containing information on the 1928 workshop, most of the material present in Box 34 Creeley Wright is a mass jumble of different documentations. Everything from vague police reports to scathing reviews of the workshop. None of them are in any particular order. The only valuable document I've managed to find out of these is a list containing the names of all the audience members who attended the 1934 Broadway premiere. Seeing as how Alice Corley James is still alive, I was seated in the fourth row of the theater. I hope to contact her soon. From the personal diary of Annabelle McGregor, the 7th of January, 1932. Garrus came home today. He seemed paler than he used to be, and much more quiet. I wish there was something I could do. I wish I could bring him back to us. But he's gone. I have to accept that. We all have to. As it turns out, the diary of Annabelle McGregor, Garrus Creeley's adoptive mother, for those of you who don't remember, was used in the writing of a 1998 psychological thesis by Catherine Jacobs entitled From Garrus to Hannah, a study as to the effects of child molestation. In the book, the author uses materials from various different child molestation trials to form an in-depth study on the resulting mental scars such experiences can produce in children. Annabelle's diary entries themselves aren't that relevant, often repeating the same things over and over and over, but they do form a cohesive thread between two big events in Garrus Creeley's life: his release from the West Riding Mental Hospital and his journey back to America. According to Annabelle McGregor, 19-year-old Garrus Creeley left his parents a week after returning to them, going off to work in a shoe factory. After being fired for his inability to follow proper safety instructions, he worked as an assistant ballet instructor in London. 6 weeks after this, he returned to his parents, where he learned that they had been harboring a secret from him. After Sheridan, his previous adoptive father, had died, Garrus was left to inherit all his belongings. This included the expansive novel Puppets and the script and score for Puppet Master the Musical. From the personal diary of Annabelle McGregor, the 18th of September, 1932. Garrus called to tell us he was leaving. He asked when he was coming home. He hung up after that. It's been 4 days, and I'm beginning to believe that I won't ever see him again. Not much is known about Garrus Creeley after that. The next existing record of him is a financial statement in 1933 concerning an inquiry for a choreographer to work on the Puppet Masters regime. It would appear that Garrus was continuing his adoptive father's work. Why on earth Garrus Creeley would drop everything in his life to continue the work of his childhood rapist is beyond all logical comprehension. One reason could be that he wanted to understand his father more. He was, after all, Sheridan's son. Perhaps he understood how much Puppet Master had meant to him, so he had devoted himself to polish up the production. In Catherine Jacobs' book, she details a great many examples of this. In the letter from Garrus to the aforementioned choreographer, he writes, "I hope to enliven the production with a bit of playful mystery, to mirror the essence of the original novel format." I don't have the complete manuscript for Puppets, though Catherine Jacobs apparently does own a small snippet of about 200 pages. God only knows how she acquired this. She lists a total of 17 excerpts in her book. From what I've read, the prose of Puppets is very difficult to follow. One might assume that Sheridan hadn't ever revised or stopped writing it. The story itself follows the main character Moriator Abbences as he goes off on an adventure to explore his own sexual agenda upon the request of a puppet that he meets in a dream. To get a feel for the odd, flowery nature of the writing, here's an excerpt. "The puppet was as black as night upon the cold winter eves of Laminstead, light and airy, yet weak and bitterly sharp. Upon sensing the figure's wooden presence, he scattered himself about the room, unable to find a proper door or window to relieve his urge to escape the angry monstrosity. His eyes danced along the riverway of contempt, stealing glances of the form that beckoned for him to remain motionless. Defeated, he rested himself within his own terror, bending as he slipped into remorse and fear." I have nothing to work with but the vague points provided by Miss Jacobs for this assumption, but I gather that Garrus used his inheritance to fund the production of the Puppet Masters regime. In the box 34 Creeley Wright, I found a small folder full of production notes from Garrus that I had glossed over in my previous search. Nothing of great importance stands out, other than the pitch Creeley used to attract the attraction of several theater owners who were interested in housing the production. In it, Garrus describes the show as upbeat, fraught with flowery production numbers, and a moral all ages can relate to. I feel like this is a good time to bring up my meeting with Miss Alice Corley James. I made sure to phone her grandchildren for permission to visit, for which I was declined 3 times. After I sent a cake, they understood my presence and I was granted access. It was a 6-hour drive to the home of Alice Corley James. Her granddaughter was hospitable enough, well, as hospitable as someone can be when they obviously don't want you in their house. She took me to the living room and offered me some of the cake, which I declined. A few moments later, I met Alice, who limped her way onto the couch with a plate in hand. I spoke to her, but she refused to converse until she had finished eating. I took an instant liking to this old bat, nutty as she was. Throughout the following Q&A, Alice made it very apparent that she had reviewed her facts. They seemed rehearsed and tired coming from her lips, but I didn't think much of it. Alice's Testament. So, how old were you when you saw the Puppet Masters regime? Oh, I was 9. I had just turned 9 that Wednesday, and we were going to have the party the following Saturday. What do you remember about the production? I don't truly remember a lot about the show. I was young, I was hyperactive, and I was bored to tears by the entire thing. It was so very monotonous and so blandly staged. I recall watching the three kitties dancing to the exact same motion, twist tap, for almost 4 minutes. All while the ensemble walked in crispy lines. It was so awkward. That little boy playing the main character, Maury something, was a bit quiet if you ask me. He sort of mumble spoke, squinting the entire show. Those vague squinty eyes were bland too. I fell asleep halfway through Act 1. And do you remember the end of Act 1? No. When I woke up, my parents were dragging me out of the theater. I spent the next 3 hours waiting by the street with my mother while my father searched for his brother. Uncle Devin was the assistant choreographer, you see. He died backstage. I think a lift collapsed. I don't know. It was only when I was 30 did they actually tell me what happened, though I remember they never acted the same again. Did your uncle keep any documentation of his work while working on the show? I wouldn't know. We weren't all that close to him, you see. If he did, where can I find those documents? Either they're still in the theater, or my father. Yeah, my father probably had them. I remember the policeman delivering the box to us. Your best chance of finding it would be in the attic. We moved all of my father's old office documents into a red chest. If it isn't there, it was most likely thrown away. Mrs. James's granddaughter aided me in my search, and together we found the red chest, as well as Devin Corley's belongings. They had been shoved into a small storage crate within the chest, sloppily strewn between wrinkled chunks of paper. I offered Alice the opportunity to rifle through the crate, but she politely shooed me out of her house before asking for another piece of cake. At first, I couldn't make much sense of the contents within the box. There were a few bills, some Blaze production notes, and a list of ensemble performers. However, one particular sheet of paper did catch my interest: the audition notes for the role of Moriator. For those of you who don't remember, this was the character whose actor was last seen begging the audience to help him on the night of the Puppet Master's premiere. Not many of the names are found in this file. Oddly enough, just 14 boys and 6 girls. Underneath the various names were writings such as, too cheeky, too quiet, too mumble mouth. But about 3/4 into the paper, the name Timmy Wright is circled 3 times, a small star etched beside it. He's the one, the note read, boldly. I've done a bit of research on this performer. Timothy Cartwright was born on August 16th, 1923. His father, Vincent Cartwright, was a lighting designer for a theater on Broadway at the time. His wife, Margie, was a costume designer. Though little is known about the beginning of Timothy's career, by the age of 9, he had taken the vaudeville world by storm as Timmy Cutie Pie Wright, or Cutie Wright for short. As far as I could gather, his only Broadway credit before the Puppet Master regime was a semi-successful flop called Joyful Hooligans, in which he played a young British boy who falls off of a ship and is taken by a band of American teenage pickpockets. Devin Corley's diary details the arrival of Timothy to the theater. He says that Timmy was asked to be dropped off in the lobby without his parents. Garris Creeley instructed the staff not to enter the lobby for an hour. At the end of this hour, Garris Creeley himself came through the lobby doors and found Timmy still in his seat by the receptionist's desk. He was quoted to have looked confused and scared, with an look in his eyes likened to an old cat, weak and defenseless. Garrus led him back to his office, where he waited for his parents to return to sign the proper paperwork. The next few entries of Devin Corley's diary describe the hiring of the rest of the cast and crew. Shirley Taxum was signed on to play Trahunt for 3 weeks, then died in an automobile accident and was replaced by Sally Wilkes. Henry Gregory was another vaudeville performer who had worked with Timmy at least twice before signed on to play Abelot. Other cast members included Fernando Perrin as Mr. Arbusker and Grace Day as Madame Repario. The casting for the Man in Black, as well as the puppet dressed in black, are not listed. Set design was done by Abraham Durante, and costumes were done by Juliana White. Lighting and direction was taken up by Garrus Creeley himself. For the first 2 weeks of production, Devin Corley's description of Creeley doesn't seem too interesting. He was apparently a bit eccentric and a bit of a perfectionist, but also described as a bit of a jolly and surreal, like those Santa impersonators you see at department stores. He was always cracking jokes and, for the most part, had a good attitude. However, as innocent as his behavior seemed, even from the beginning he had a strange obsession with Timothy White. Corley details an instance where Timmy was clearly getting the choreography wrong, and yet Garrus berated the other children for supposedly messing Timmy up. From Devin Corley's perspective, he coddles the boy and barely even directs him. Now, as lighthearted as he was, Garrus Creeley was also a rather strict director. Devin Corley claims that each of the cast members were instructed to arrive at 4 a.m, 2 hours before the crew, simply for vocal exercises and warm-ups. One entry states the ensemble was placed into 3 lines, and the children were lined up in front. Mr. Creeley would spend 15 minutes going over the exact same tap dance routine each morning. He always had Timmy do it first, and then the others were to follow. Afterwards, everyone was to gather in a circle for vocal warm-ups. Garrus would start by going through their ranges, then he had us do that awful dance. There were to be 2 circles, one inside the other, and the cast would hold hands. Then both circles were to dance around in opposite directions. The outer circle began to chant first, crying out Cimital, Cimital, while the inner circle yelled out Frael, Frael. Both chants were ensemble lyrics that had been cut from the production, but Mr. Creeley saw fit to include them every morning, saying they were perfect vocal exercises. Garrus' impatience continued throughout the rehearsals as he grew violent, and many cast members reported to Devin that Sally Wilkes exhibited bruises on her upper arms. The script was modified weekly, putting the company under great stress. Timmy Wright was the one who took most of the damage, as most of the changes gave his character more lines, placing a lot of pressure on him. He was often asked to visit Creeley's office for private readings, where he'd stay for hours. Tragedy entered the life of Timothy Cartwright on August 13th, 1933, when he and his family were the victims of an automobile accident which killed his father and severely injured both he and his mother. Devin writes that for a month and a half, Garrus visited Timmy daily and eventually stopped coming to rehearsals altogether. The principal choreographer, Mandus Thorman, took up the role of director during that time. It is also at this point that they sought out the employment of 14-year-old Rory Atkins to be the understudy for Timmy. Devin writes that it was at the conspiring of Thorum and the producers that Rory would eventually replace Timmy. This cutie writes one producer, is completely inept at the art of performance. His delivery is too big, his eyes are too big, his presence is too big. And for all that bigness, he was shockingly little. While Garrus was gone, the production staff also persisted in cutting certain things from the show. This included a number that occurred midway through Act 2, a gibberish song sang by an army of puppets that was said to have slowed down the production. Crearly was quite unhappy with this, making several angry phone calls about the matter. They eventually gave him an ultimatum: cut the number completely or put it somewhere else. Garrus placed it at the end of Act 1. Devin notes that Garrus would tell the children to practice this number in their own time, and then they did run through it during rehearsals. It was in segments, never to its entirety. The number itself contained one group of lyrics that was repeated over and over and over again. Garrus made it painfully clear that the company was to sing these stanzas exactly 100 times before they could take a break during intermission. Even if the curtain closed before they were finished, Devin's journal ends with a relief from the notes throughout. Instead, he explains an event that he himself was present for. I think it's best to simply present the section as it was written. Nobody was ever allowed in Mr. Curley's office but Mr. Curley and Timmy. I assumed Mr. Curley would want to meet Rory, but he never asked for an audience with him. Mandus had instructed me to deliver 3 resignation letters to Mr. Curley's desk. When I entered the room, it was all musty and hot, like there wasn't even air conditioning there. The curtains were drawn, but my vision adapted fairly quickly. I saw that on the floor was a worm mattress with plates and cups all around it. I blinked in surprise. Rushing over to the bedding, I noticed it had definitely been in use for quite some time. I wondered in astonishment if Mr. Crearly had been living in the theater. When I considered the idea, I did recall that he'd put all his money into this show, and we never heard him ask us to send papers to his house, only to his office. Along the far end of the room were a few piles of shirts and trousers. It was still very dark, so I didn't focus on them too much. I went to set the papers down on the desk when, against my better judgment, I had the urge to snoop around a bit. I looked over the top of the desk, which had nothing but pens and scrambled folders, then went right to the center drawer. What was inside it frightens me more now than it did at the time. Within the drawer was a gun. A bit eccentric maybe, but I thought nothing of it. As well as a worn hand-painted mask, red in color. It was put into a shape of a doll's face. A puppet's beside the mask was a small journal. I opened it and found the pages to be yellowed with age. They concealed man writings that were barely legible, but I could tell by the drawings that it was some sort of worshipper's guide. There were these charcoal sketches of a puppet, a giant puppet, that controlled the world on strings protruding from its fingernails. Other pictures showed the puppet walking amongst common men who could not see it. There was this drawing of a man raping a small girl, the puppet controlling his arms. There was a man stroking the bodies of his wife and children. a young girl being brought for the night by an older gentleman, two twins being held down on their bed by some invisible force, all pictures in which the puppet stood, grinning. I placed the journal back into the drawer, but then I noticed the mask. It had the same face as the puppet, as well as an insane grin, wide eyes, and puffy cheeks. It was only when I held it closer to my face did I notice that it also shared the features of Timmy. The same mouth, the same nose, the same eyes. I shoved the mask back into the drawer and shut it quickly, my curiosity morphing into sickness. I backed away from the desk and hit the wall. Turning to my right, my foot came into contact with a pile of clothes I saw earlier. My eyes had completely adjusted to the dark by now, and I could see that not all of the shirts and trousers were Mr. Creeley's size. At least 4 of them were smaller. The kind of clothes a young boy would wear. I grabbed the papers off the desk and ran out, delivering them into Mr. Creeley's hand that afternoon. After this, there were 7 blank pages in the journal of Devin Corley, and no more entries. At the bottom of this crate, however, was a newspaper dated October 3rd, 1935. The headline read, "Flower Shop Vandal Strikes Again." And on the 3rd page is a small section dedicated to the disaster that occurred on August Wilson Theater on October 1st. Oddly enough, the article doesn't mention the Puppet Master regime by name more than once, but its focus is on the aftermath. In an interview with police officer Jeremy Winthrop, "We ain't got no idea what could have happened. Got a call from a diner down the street talking about some riot going down at the August Wilson. Came to find a bunch of theater goers crying and begging for help. Just kept saying, 'They're dead, they're dead, they're really dead.' We went inside, but we didn't find anything. You see, 76 attendants of the 1935 showing went missing. 1998 if you count the theater company. Their bodies were never recovered from the stage. Though many testified to have seen them die, others claim to have watched people collapse in the aisles. When police investigated the theater, they saw that one of the lifts backstage had collapsed, but there were no traces of anyone there. The only body recovered was that of Garris Creeley. He had been found in his office with a bullet in his head. Other than that, nothing. No blood, no struggle. Those 98 people were never seen again. After that, there's nothing left in the crate but barely visible photo of cast members and fabric samples from the costumes. At this point, my investigation into the Puppet Master regime ended, or at least the historical investigation. Do you remember the revival of the play I mentioned in my first post? Well, the first preview performance will take place in Chicago on September 18th. And I've already booked balcony seats. Being a full-time investigator for an obscure pornographic musical doesn't lend itself to much of an earning, you see. I will be attending this show where I will record the audio and take notes of the production. I'll do a detailed run-through of it the day afterwards. The investigation will resume on September the 18th. September 20th. Alright, I never got around to posting the previous investigation. I know it wasn't responsible, but during my wait for Puppet Master, I started actually paying attention to my college courses, and I never really had the time to revisit my first draft. So I suppose I'll just have to post my findings in one long entry. I have seen the revival of the Puppet Master. The experience was odd. It had to... It's hard to remember the things that went wrong unless I run through the entire thing in my head. The easier to write about the first act in that way, I guess. I know that it doesn't really make sense when you put it to words, but it's hard to explain. But enough of my cryptic buildup. I arrived in Chicago last week, where I stayed with a couple of old high school friends for a few days. We had fun catching up, but I never took my mind off of the Puppet Master's regime. The theater that housed the production was rather obscure, located a few miles out of the main city. None of the news articles I've read post-preview or have mentioned the name of the theater, so I can only imagine they don't want the publicity. Upon entering the theater, I was given a playbill by a cheery man in a suit, an older gentleman with a weak smile on his face. It showed the white silhouette of a young boy with several puppet strings attached to a scribbly red and black heart that hung within his chest. There were white dollies dangling all around him. I remember thinking it was odd that a preview playbill would be in color, as those aren't usually printed until the show starts making money. Anyhow, I made it to my seat and began to read through the playbill itself. I didn't care much about the names of the cast members, though I do recall seeing the picture for the boy playing the part of Moriator, a 14-year-old named Milton Holiday. The show opened to a long, plodding overture performed mostly with piano, with these odd whistles being played through speakers all around the theater. After about 5 minutes, the music changed to a more bouncy, lighthearted tune, and the curtain came up. The stage was empty. There was nothing but the projected backdrop of a village square, with these odd clouds floating above. About 10 children in 18th century German clothing skipped on stage. Playing with balloons and dolls, as the music progressed, a small mechanical horse wheeled itself on stage. The lights dimmed and the children stopped. The horse dragged along a cart upon which a small curtain puppet box faced the audience. As the cart came to a stop, a large puppet in a black robe flew out from behind the curtain. The children screamed and backed away. The puppet spoke.
Hello, little ones. It's a wondrous day for a bout of play, isn't it? Now, don't you be frightened, sweetlings. The puppet dressed in black has a tale to weave, and someone has to hear it. Why, even if the story isn't terribly uplifting, isn't it relevance that matters, isn't it? Now, gather, my popinjays, for this story, I'm afraid, requires the keen ears of curious children. Only the innocent can see things simply, without the distractions of growth.
The children looked at each other, then slowly began to gather around the cart. Once they were all seated, the puppet let out a chilling laugh.
That's the spirit, kiddies.
He spoke.
Now, this is a story about many things. About love and hate. About dark and light. About the difference between right and wrong. And the difference between wrong and right. But at the core, this is a story about a little boy named
And with that, the light on the cart faded away and was replaced by a small boy holding a broom, smiling proudly. Moriator, the rest of the prologue is rather bland. I can remember or decipher the audio to much of the exposition. The puppet, Moriator, and Mr. Obisker share a song. We learn that Moriator was an orphan who Mr. Obisker found on the side of the street 5 years ago, and has since put him to work in his puppet shop. The costumes from this point on seem much less historically accurate from the opening scene. Everyone's clothes are faded and bland, but each of their outfits are also ridiculously frilly and layered. Some of the story's exposition was changed. For example, Moriator's last name, Abinses, has been reapplied from the novel on which the story was based. The staging and set design was oddly reminiscent of Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Woman in White. Most of the sets were made up of hyper-realistic projections that gave the illusion of a moving camera. However, unlike The Woman in White, there were far more set pieces which actually had moving images projected onto them, like the revival of Sunday in the Park with George. For example, during one of the opening songs, I could hear them whisper, we see Moriator sweep up around the puppet shop, which we watch as the front desk and 2 puppet display shelves spin around on a turntable as the projected background spins slightly faster, adding in ominous shadows and subtle lighting changes. It was dizzying but effective. Most of Act 1's exposition seemed rather harmless in my opinion. It almost felt like the start of a Disney show. However, I did find my inner critic rolling his eyes at some of the frilly lyrics. My personal favorites being he pretended he was crying, though they told me he was lying, and he was a sickly boy knowing not of joy. However, upon comparing the new versions to what I've heard about the other two, there were some significant changes to the show. The character of Madame Rasperio was cut completely. After the cutesy song Get a Puppet, we are taken to the center of a village. Here we have one of the songs that had been cut in the previous versions entitled Whittleton, in which the villagers celebrate a holiday of the same name. This celebration focuses on the townspeople dancing around with puppets and dolls made out of random objects like twigs, scraps of clothing, and cornstalk. The music is charming like a folk song, although the lyrics don't seem to make much sense. Dancing as we pitter through the withering and woe, evermore aligned along the ever-growing row. Eyes without a trace of tones of livinghood or so, rise and rejoice for the Whittletine song, and the willows will wander all Whittletine long. Here, the song where the children sell dolls is used as a bridge in the Whittleton sequence. Another change is the rearranging of The Wind and the Whispers, a song that was originally played in Act 2. In this new version, it is sung monotonously by a group of black-clad people mourning the loss of a young girl, a rape victim. The sequence itself is so strange. Around 8 people walk on stage, 4 of them carrying a small open coffin. The lighting goes from yellow-orange to blue, and the chorus drones on for about 8 minutes as they somewhat explain how this girl died. The wind was her muse for play, and she had pranced all along the riverway. She slipped along the sides of weeping willow hairs, and she danced along the riverway with nary a remorse. The whisperings from far away, calling out for her to stay. She stayed there with the wind and the whisperings of yore, and she danced with him until he saw fit to take her source. Again, this uncomfortable ensemble song goes on for about 8 minutes. From what can I assume, the little girl had been playing around the river when a man asked her to stay with him until nighttime, at which point he raped her and tried to drown her before a policeman stopped him, right as the girl perished. Other than that, most of Act 1 seemed the same as the other version. There is a small section where a girl with a puppet mysteriously appears and disappears while Moriater sweeps up the shop, and a random scene right before the finale in which Mr. Arbusker sings about the hardships of raising Moriater, a song reworked from the same song Madame Reperio sang in 1934. The finale song, which so many people had claimed held some sort of force to it in the 1934 production, didn't seem at all that powerful, though this may have been due to the rewrite. The 1934 version was said to be significantly longer than the 1928 workshop, at around 12 minutes of non-stop gibberish lyrics. The modern version of the reprise of the Wind and the Whisperings, followed by a few verses told through the odd language. The lyrics are, in fact, somewhat odd-sounding after 2 minutes of non-stop strobe lighting, but I wasn't that affected by it. There weren't any deaths after the finale, at least through the intermission. Did last 10 minutes longer than it was supposed to, due to a technical difficulties backstage. Act 2 was where most of the changes seem to be. It began with a light on Moriater being strung up on ropes like a puppet, his friends and Mr. Arbusker hanging on either side of him. A new number occurs where all the songs from Act 1 are placed into a montage while the Act 1 finale music plays in the background. Just as the music shifts to the pounding Wilton music, Moriater awakens. Remembering when I mentioned that Act 2 was mostly made up of a bunch of songs played one after the other for no apparent reason, most of that had been cut. The only 2 songs left from that long drawn out sequence were What Is This Place? And Moriater's soliloquy, which had been renamed to Moriater Confronts the Puppet and changed to a duet sequence. The lyrics had been improved as well, whereas the 1934 show had lyrics such as, "What is this place? What are you aiming? This isn't well, sir. Why are we gaming? This isn't a game." The improved lyrics are, "What is this place? Wait, am I dreaming? This isn't real, no, not what it's seeming. It is all a dream." Still a bit clunky, but at least they make sense now. The particular scenes I listed before involving the panicking Moriater confronting the puppet dressed in black, who explained that Moriater's soul once belonged to a child rapist and that he died before the puppet could punish him. This is where the set designs became a bit odd. There were several floor-to-ceiling metal dollies that would consistently roll about on stage, as if to symbolize Moriater walking somewhere. The backdrop went red, and there were projections of puppets flinging the corpses of children along the walls. To say it was unsettling would be a damn understatement. After this, the story progressed in a similar manner to the 1928 workshop, but with different twists. Moriater learned that the odd-looking man in black from the first deck was the boy that Moriater raped in a past life. The man in black wished to revisit their relationship, but Moriater wanted nothing to do with him. They spent the next 10 minutes singing about what might have been, and Moriater began to remember things. He ended up seducing and dominating the man in black, and then had sex on a bed while a group of children acrobats frolicked about on long sheets of fabric above them. Just then, the puppet dressed in black showed up and ordered the old man to go away. He explained to Moriator that his punishment was to forever serve him, aiding in the future rape and murder of children in the village where he lived. As they both sang the title song, several children, including the little girl who was drowned in Act 1, joined in, all holding miniature puppets dressed in black. The new ending is a bit confusing, but apparently they're saying that pedophilia is some sort of vicious cycle. When a pedophile dies, his soul is placed in a newborn child who will, by fate, be raped themselves. This influences them to become child molesters in their adulthood. Moriator, as well as several other children, managed to defy destiny by escaping their respective rapists, which resulted in them being enlisted into the Puppet Master's regime. It makes so little sense, and it's so damn creepy. Then, just like in the 1928 workshop, all of Moriator's friends were returned to the puppet shop, but none of them had any memory of Moriator. We cut back to the cart from the prologue, where we saw that all of the children had disappeared. Behind the puppet box, Moriator and the man in black exited from behind the curtains. They hopped upon a horse and began to trot their way out of the town. As they left the village, they heard a small girl's terrified screams before she lunged out in front of the cart. She began to beg Moriator and his companion to help her, just as an old man rushed out in pursuit. He insisted he was the girl's father, but she sobbed that she'd never met him before. Panicked, Moriator pulled on the horse reins and ran over the man, killing him. The man in black turned to Moriator, and his voice low whispered, "Moriator, what have you done?" before the lights went out. However, right after this scene is where things quickly became wrong. The light slowly faded from green tint of the forest into a deep blue, similar to how things looked during the wind and the whisperings. The entire company slipped out of the backstage holding their miniature puppets, staring directly at the audience. Just then, the lights began to flash. And the puppets. I know this sounds wrong and kind of stupid, but they sang. I don't mean that the children sang while controlling the puppets' mouths. The puppets actually sang. Oh God, that song. It was the same gibberish from Act 1 finale. The children and the adults, all of them holding their puppets, they chanted those horrible words over and over and over again, their eyes unblinking, focused on the audience. Trapped in our seats, we were forced to listen to them repeat themselves over and over. I saw that the cast had begun to move the puppets around in jerking near erotic dance moves, every now and again twitching in unison with the rest of the company. After a while, I began to feel sick. We were all sick. I could see people in front of me leave their seats ready to go. I tried tuning the chants out, but that only seemed to make it worse. The music pounded within me, causing me to jerk about with each pounding drum. As I leaned back into my seat, I realized something. The pounding within me wasn't just from the orchestra. It was from beneath me. For a moment, I could see that everyone else had noticed it as well. For a faint moment, we'd felt the ground beneath us quake along with the chants. I looked up to see if the cast had realized, but then I saw the puppets. They were still dancing and moving within the performer's grasp, but the performers themselves weren't moving their arms. And then, for a moment, we all found relief. From backstage, several crew members rushed onto the stage, pushing several actors away in the process. One of them screamed out, "Fire! Shit!" And then the chaos began. From above the stage, all the lights began to shoot off. The projections behind the actors flickered and then disappeared entirely. The company screamed, as did the audience. In a flash of fire and sparks, the actors began to leap off the stage, and we all began to pile out the door. I still had a headache, and I could still hear the pounding. The fire department arrived shortly after the theater was evacuated. About 10 minutes before the trucks got there, we heard the back of the theater collapse. I've since checked the articles online, and over 60 attendants of that show, 9 of them being part of the cast and crew, have gone missing. As it turned out, most of the people who didn't leave the parking lot were either helping out, like me, or were too shaken to drive. When I finally began walking towards my car, a gunnery was wheeled past me. The man I saw laying there unconscious and hooked up to an oxygen tank was the same man who handed me the playbill. I drove back to my friend's apartment and went straight to bed. Even in my sleep, I could still hear the pounding. By morning, my headache had stopped, but the memory of that night before lingered. I went to my computer straight away to upload the audio I had recorded. My camera tends to divide long videos into smaller ones, and I immediately deleted the last video. Nobody ever needed to hear that, especially not me. I listened through the recording again, making notes in word processor as I went along. I found myself humming to some of the more bouncy tunes. The pounding slowly fading away. My fear of the show had lessened. The idea of supernatural forces destroying the theater seemed far too ridiculous for me to take seriously, so I brushed my fear aside. Once that was done, I went to work scanning the playbill. After doing the front, I got to work on the interior pages. Curiously, I also ended up skimming through some of the production names. And it was then, right there on the third page, that I saw the picture of the man who had handed me the playbill. He was the head producer / director. I learned. A cheery, older guy with a wrinkled face looking away from the camera. Below his name, in the picture in bold letters, read Timothy Cartwright. My face scrunched, my breath went still. All I could hear was the faint memory of the pounding. That couldn't be right, I told myself. It couldn't be possible. It was a different person. It had to be. Timmy Wright died on October 1st, 1935, at the premiere of The Puppet Master's Regime. Everyone saw it. Everyone saw him begging for help, tied up in strings. This couldn't be real. Then I remembered something in my interview with Alice Corley James. She mentioned Moriader's squinting eyes, and then his monotonous acting. Timmy Wright was also known for his wide-eyed expressions and over-the-top delivery. It's what made him famous. The person performing Moriader that night in 1934 must have been Rory Atkins, the understudy. That and Garrish Crilly had been found dead, killed by a gunshot to the head. Everyone assumed it was a suicide. Nobody even suspected murder. I remember Devon's journal, the puppet mask, the clothes, the fascination Crilly had with little Cutie Wright. Nobody even suspected murder. Why would they? And then to add my revelation, I realized that among the cast members who had escaped from the theater, there was one boy sitting in the back seat of his mother's car, the vague, empty face of Milton Holiday, Moriader. The Puppet Master's Regime isn't a simple musical, I've come to realize. It's more than a production, it's a force, an entity. Even it's not only a madman's sick elaborate scheme to rape his own son. It isn't just a young boy's obsession over destroying his father's work. It isn't. an innocent victim's last attempt at showing the world how he was wronged. It was a greater monster than that. Within the writing and music of this show is something I don't know what, and I don't want to know. My guess is some kind of monster that refuses to die. People who saw the Puppet Master's regime in both 1928 and 1934 were said to have suffered from lifelong mental conditions, causing them to hum tunes they had heard only once. Even now as I type, I quietly hum the sick, demented tune of Never Mind Me, Mister. When I sleep, the wind and the whispering refuses to rid itself of my subconscious. I find myself thinking about the production night and day, and the depth of certain subplots and songs. What's worse is that I know that someday another revival of this demented work will make its way onto the stage. Milton Holiday is still alive, isn't he? And this evil won't rest until it remakes itself again. I've decided not to post any more of my findings. This includes the audio taken of the revival. I suggest that none of you attempt to look further into this matter. It simply isn't worth it. Update September 27th. A few days after my previous update, I read some articles about the fire at the theater. Remember all those missing people? The fire department has been searching through the rubble. Not one body has been found.